Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of the Roadkill Entertainment Video Village podcast. This episode doesn't really have a title yet. I'll figure out what the heck to title it when I actually post it up, but generally speaking, we're going to be dealing with 70s horror today. I'm going to go over some stuff and just review movies like I usually do. I figured an interesting way to start out this podcast would be for me to tell you, my name is Jay Byrne, by the way, and I am the host of this podcast for Roadkill Entertainment. It's also called Video Village, but I figured a cool way for me to start this today, since it's December, this is a December episode, every podcast you listen to right now is doing their holiday horror stuff. And aside from, all I'm going to say about holiday horror is that my wife Katie, Riz, and I are going to see Silent Night, Deadly Night at one of our local theaters Wednesday, December 4th, for Fangoria's reissue of Silent Night, Deadly Night. I'm really excited about seeing Silent Night, Deadly Night on the big screen because supposedly it's a brand new HD transfer, and I'm very curious to see if they've actually remastered the uncut footage of the film, because according to the previous Anchor Bay DVD that came out, the uncut version of the movie is only available on the VHS master tape. Actually, it would have been like a VHS master that they would have used to make the videotapes back in the day. That's all Anchor Bay had to do. The uncut footage, the extra scenes, the longer cut, basically, which is most likely probably the original theatrical cut. That stuff gets a little confusing, but so I'm excited to go see that on Wednesday because it's remastered in HD, and I'm very curious if it's going to be the complete uncut version of the movie. The runtime states as 85 minutes. And that is the complete uncut runtime of the movie. So we'll just have to wait and see if that ends up being what it is. Because otherwise it was like 79 minutes or something like that, which was the R-rated cut. Which I don't know if that was just like a cut version that was shown in some theaters or on cable or what. I don't know. The history of that movie is kind of crazy. But it'd be nice to see if there is a fully restored HD version of the entire uncut version of that film. It'll be great because then maybe someday we'll finally get a Blu-ray release of the complete version of the film. And I don't know, maybe Fangoria is planning that. Maybe it's going to be a flagship release for them under a certain label that they're putting together or something like that. Not sure, but I do know that that is what I'm doing on Wednesday. And that's about all I'm going to say about holiday horror because, everybody's doing a holiday horror episode. I mean, you can watch Christmas Evil too because that movie rules. So, and Black Christmas, okay? Those are my 3 holiday horror recommendations. Watch Black Christmas, Christmas Evil, and Silent Night, Deadly Night. And that's about all you really need that I can think of. Oh, and you better watch out, of course, Roadkill Entertainment production. But my movie and Mike Welch's movie as well. I decided to do another podcast for December, just myself, because it's a little hard to get people right now because, my buddy Mike works a lot. He works at Newbury Comics in North Dartmouth, and he's kind of busy. So I know it's hard to get some time with him. So I figured I'd just do this December edition of Video Village myself. Yeah, I'm stumbling over my words today, but that's okay. So today's edition is going to be basically about 70s horror films because I've been on this 70s horror movie kick lately. But you know what? I'm going to start this podcast off before I get into that and before I start rambling off on 70s horror films. I'm going to start off with just a little story. I guess this is my Christmas treat, right? I don't know. Everybody has a story about how they got into horror movies. Like, their gateway story. Like, who started them getting into horror films? And I think when I got guests on, once I get somebody else in here, I'm going to be recording a podcast this later in December, towards the end of the month, and I'm going to have my buddy Peter Lambert from Diamond Camp Films on, and he's going to talk about his movies, and we're going to talk about horror in general because we grew up just hanging out, watching movies and renting movies from the video store, and that's how it all started for me. So it'll be fun to sit down and talk with Pete about that and do that stuff. So that's going to be the January episode of, it's pretty much going to be like a Diamond Camp Films and like remembering things from our past type episode to do with horror and all that kind of stuff. It'll be a fun episode to listen to because I'll actually have somebody else here to talk to other than myself. But so But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my story on how I got introduced into horror, like how it all started for me. Because as a kid, and I'm going to do this with pretty much every guest. If I have a different guest on, I'm going to have them tell their story too. This is always just kind of fun to hear, like how somebody got into horror movies. When I was a kid, I was terrified of horror movies. My initial reaction to horror films was sheer terror. I can remember being really young, and my parents rented Something Else and Poltergeist. They were watching Poltergeist on the TV in the living room. And the music, the really creepy, like, you know, the score by, I think it's Jerry Goldsmith who did the score for Poltergeist, which is that creepy little sing-songy, the la 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 la, that thing, all right? And my singing's wonderful today, but that's okay. And that music creeped the hell out of me. I remember sitting in the other room, and it was actually scarier not watching the movie and just hearing the score music from the other room, because I love Poltergeist now. I've always loved the movie. And the movie's scary, but it's Spielberg-y scary. You know, it has that Amblin quality about it, if you're familiar with Amblin. Like the Spielberg, what they called their production company was Amblin Films, or just Amblin in general, with the little bicycle, the ET bike going over the moon and stuff like that. So anyway, I was terrified of Poltergeist as a kid, and the music and whatnot. I remember spending like that whole night in the bathroom, like I don't know if I felt like I was gonna get sick or throw up because of the movie, or if it was just because I was getting myself so nerved up that I thought I was sick. Maybe I was just trying to get my mom's attention because she was in the other room actually watching the horror film, and I was just kind of, you know, being stupid about it. But so that was my initial, like, what I remember for being really young, probably like 5-6 years old or something like that. But I do remember when I was around 10 or 11 years old, it probably would have been 10 years old, we first moved into this house on Maple Drive in Tiverton, Rhode Island. And we were still kind of young, me and my sister. So when my parents would go out or they had something to do, our next door neighbor, her name was Donna Ritchie. She used to actually babysit me and my sister. And I haven't seen Donna in like a bajillion years. But she used to babysit me and my sister. So what I just remember, she had recorded Stanley Kubrick's The Shining off of ABC. It was like a Monday night movie or something. It was a weekday movie. You know how they always do the movies and stuff like that. And I remember being like really freaked out, but she wanted us to see it. She's like, "Oh, this movie's really good. You should watch it. It's scary." Like, it's pretty sadistic to think about this now, because she was basically just like trying to freak me and my sister out, probably by showing us a horror movie. So she showed us The Shining, and my sister, like, she wasn't scared of this stuff. It was, for whatever reason, horror movies didn't freak her out. She wasn't really into them or anything, but they didn't freak her out either. And so I remember her just making me and my sister watch The Shining with Jack Nicholson, Stanley Kubrick's movie from 1980 or 81. I think it's 80. And I ended up really enjoying the movie and liking it a lot. I was terrified of like the two little girls in the hallway with the old dresses on, and the bloody, like when Danny comes around the hall and all of a sudden they're just there, and there's the two little creepy girls in the hallway. I mean, I think I had nightmares. I used to think I saw those two little girls standing in the hallway of my bedroom at night all the time. I was terrified of those two little girls, but I enjoyed the movie. And from that point on, that was when it was like, okay, I can handle horror films, and I wanted to watch more horror movies. And I remember borrowing Nightmare on Elm Street off my grandmother, because my grandmother, Janelle Byrne, she used to record everything and anything off of cable. She had a wall of just videotapes and cases, and she kept a log of everything she recorded as well. So it was kind of what started me in my movie collecting. My grandmother was a big movie collector. She used to record like 3 movies to a tape, in SLP speed. And she had a wall full of videotapes, and they were all like neatly labeled. So we used to just go over a house and just, it was like renting a movie. What can we watch? What does grandma have? And we'd bring it home. And she had Nightmare on Elm Street recorded, and I decided, well, I'm going to try to watch Nightmare on Elm Street. And it must have recorded off HBO from back in the day. And I remember putting the movie on and getting as far as the part where Tina is being dragged down the hallway in the body bag when Nancy's in the classroom and Tina shows up in the doorway in the body bag, and then you see her getting dragged down the hallway like the blood, and I just was terrified. I had to shut it off. I couldn't make it any further. But I mean, I was slowly getting into horror at that point. But that was my story. That's my horror gateway story. That's how I got into it. My babysitter pretty much forced me and my sister to watch The Shining, and I ended up liking it even though it terrified me, and that's how that stuff went. But yeah, so moving forward with these podcasts, I'm going to have my guests or whoever I have on. Yeah, I'm going to be doing them by myself from time to time as well. So this will happen where it's just me rambling on and on talking about movies, but that's okay. Apparently we got a few hits on the first podcast, so somebody's listening to them. So if there's that one person out there that's listening to me ramble on, this is for you, okay? But so I'm going to move forward too, and I'm going to do a couple of reviews before I get into the main subject of the podcast for this week. For this month, the month of December. So, I got a handful of movies here that I just got. The first one that's right on the top, I'll talk about that one first. I received Day of the Animals. Scorpion Releasing put this out on Blu-ray, and this is from 1977, this movie, and it was directed by a guy named William Girdler. Actually, it's his follow-up film to 1976 hit film Grizzly, which I like Grizzly, okay? Grizzly's a good movie, but for some reason, Day of the Animals, I like a lot better. It's got more of an ensemble cast. You've got a whole bunch of people in the movie, actually. You've got, Christopher George, Linda Day George, Leslie Nielsen, Richard Jekyll, like a whole bunch of cool character actors from the 70s. And they all go on this, like, a backpacking trip with this guide who brings them up the mountain. And, basically they're just going on a hiking trip. And during this time, there's a very environmental message, about going throughout the movie, where you're dealing with, these news reports constantly going throughout the movie, and this kind of spoilers. And I'm going to try not to give away the whole movie, but I'm going to give the general gist of the movie. So if you're opposed to spoilers, maybe skip ahead a little bit. I'm not going to give too much away, though. I'm just going to tell you what the movie's generally about. And so they're on this hiking trip, and while this is going on, there's all these news reports about how the ozone layer is depleting, and it's causing the animals to start freaking out and doing weird things, and they can't figure out what's going on, but they're pretty sure it has to do with this, it's been really, really hot lately because the ozone layer is messed up. And this was back in 1977, so they were talking about this stuff even as far back as the 70s. So basically what it is it makes all the animals go crazy. So you've got lions and mountain cats and birds and all kinds of stuff like that, and bears just attacking people at random. And then you've got this group of campers, this group of hikers out in the middle of the woods, basically bait for all these animals because they're all going to get attacked at various times. And there's a subplot with Leslie Nielsen where he's just he's worse than the animals. He's kind of like a psychopath, and it's a lot of fun, actually. It's a really fun 70s movie. It's a little slow in some spots, but if you're a fan of these 70s nature gone wild films, I think you'd really enjoy it. And I mean, I do. I've always liked this one. I actually like this one better than Grizzly, although a lot of people prefer Grizzly. Grizzly's a great movie, but Grizzly's just kind of campy and silly, and it's a complete ripoff of Jaws. It's the same plot as Jaws. Well, these movies were kind of made because of Jaws. This, Piranha, everyone was trying to jump on the Jaws bandwagon in the 70s. But back to the release by Scorpion Releasing. This is a really cool Blu-ray. It's a great transfer, and actually what's really awesome about it is, I want to say it was Media Blasters Was it Media Blast? It was either Media Blasters or Code Red, because sometimes they get a little confusing because Media Blasters was distributing Code Red, so I get a little confused at which one it was. It might have been Code... No, I think it was Media Blasters. Somebody's going to correct me. If I'm wrong, correct me. But anyway, there was a DVD release of the movie that came out. And the DVD release had 2 versions of the film on it. It had a full-frame television broadcast version of the movie, which wasn't cut at all, because I guess the movie doesn't really have anything that bad in it, so it's a PG movie. So it was shown uncut on television, but the television master was the best quality version of the movie that existed, according to Media Blasters or Code Red or whoever put it out. And so they had that version of the movie, which was full frame, pan scan, because the movie's scope, it's 2:3:5:1, and then they had a widescreen print that was taken from a print that they found, which was in horrible condition, but it was like a very grindhousey looking print, and it was really bad quality too, because they had compressed it really bad to fit on the DVD with the other movie. It was really low compression rate, so it was a lot of crap in the image, and it was not the ideal way to watch the movie. Honestly, I can't stand pan scan, but the pan scan version looks so much better that when it came to watching the movie, I would just watch the pan scan version, because it looked a hell of a lot better than the widescreen version. The widescreen version was dull and muted, and the colors were terrible. So that was the version that was available on DVD, and I'm pretty sure there was no widescreen version available overseas as well. There might have been an import somewhere, I'm not sure. It was probably just taken from the same masters. So what makes this really awesome that Scorpion put this out is they put a brand new HD transfer from the original interpositive. Now, if you're not familiar with film terms, I want to make sure I get this right. I mean, I worked as a projectionist for 7 years, so I'm familiar with film in general. But the interpositive is, if I remember correctly, it's the original. Like when they make a film, they cut the film together. They make a work print. Then they take that work print and then they have the original negative cut to match the work print. And then they take that negative and they make a print from that negative, and all subsequent prints that are sent out are made from that print, which is, if I'm correct, is the original interpositive. So basically it's the first real print of the film. It's like the master print of the film. And it doesn't say the original original negative, like and when they say negative, a lot of times too, they're referring to the actual original camera negatives, which means they actually have to recut the film and reconform it and all that stuff. But it says it's taken from mastered in HD from the original interpositive, so it's from the earliest possible print source that was most likely the master for all the theatrical prints. And let me tell you, this looks great. It's very filmic. Yeah, it's got some pops and scratches and whatnot. The colors are awesome. It's a gorgeous transfer. If you like these type of 70s movies, if you're familiar with this movie in general, it is so worth it to get this Blu-ray release, because it's a really good transfer of the Blu-ray. But so I highly recommend this. If you're fans or even interested in Day of the Animals, pick up Scorpion Releasing's Blu-ray release of it. It comes with the new transfer. It's got a brand new 5.1 surround sound soundtrack that actually sounds pretty good for the age of the movie. It's got an isolated music track by composer Lalo Schifrin. That's pretty damn cool that you can listen to his score to this movie on a separate track, because his score is pretty awesome. It's a very classic, cool 70s horror movie type score. If you're familiar with his work from like Dirty Harry and like Amityville Horror, it's closer to the Amityville Horror actually, as far as like that type of work is for what he was doing. There's interviews with the actors John Cedar and Paul Manti, which I think that was available on the previous DVD as well. And there's this fun facts and trivia segment with Mr. Pickles and Cat. So that's just I can't think of her name now. Katrina's Nightmare Theater is what they were calling it for the horror movies. She was doing these introductions for the horror movies for Scorpion. And there is an introduction for this movie, and it's kind of silly. She tells some trivia facts and does this goofy little skit, but it's it's fun to watch. She's kind of funny to watch. So I think she's an ex-wrestler. My buddy was telling me, but grabbing a quick drink of water there to dry it. My throat gets a little dry from just blabbing on and on. Okay, so, and it also includes the original English mono as well as the 5.1 if you're a purist. So this is well worth it. It has a flip cover with 2 different poster artworks, but you can put it on whichever side that you want. So that's awesome. That's pretty wild. I'm going to move down the line here, and I'm going to specifically talk about another relatively rare release. Code Red just got into the Blu-ray game, and there's not much on this release, but Code Red, as for one, they released 2 movies as part of their first releases, and it's kind of hard to get these movies. You got to get them either through Diabolic DVD or right off the Code Red website. And they released Just Before Dawn and a movie called Voices from Beyond. So Just Before Dawn is awesome. I'm not sure if I talked about this in the last episode. If I did, then I might be repeating myself a little bit, but I'll make it pretty quick. A great 70s thriller, like Deliverance style thriller about a bunch of people just get stuck in the woods and there's crazy people. It's kind of a slasher movie vibe. A guy named Jeff Lieberman made it. He made a movie called Squirm. It's a great movie, and this is definitely the best transfer of the movie that's existed. It's original uncut version from the original internegative, so it's the negative for that interpositive. It's craziness, but anyway. And there's an extended cut for overseas distribution, which is actually like 10 or 12 minutes longer. 9100, it's like 10 minutes longer. And I flipped through it. It's just a lot of just random extra dialogue scenes and stuff in the movie, which is kind of interesting. And that print is in rough shape. So I'd say the best way to watch the movie is just watch the original uncut version, and then you watch the extended cut as an afterthought, and then it has the original trailer. That's all that's on here, but it's a really good packaging. It has a cool cover, has some original poster artwork on the cover, and everything. So Code Red's coming into the Blu-ray business here, and I'm really kind of psyched. This is a good release. It's a little pricey. It's about $30, but it's well worth picking up if you're a fan of Jeff Lieberman's Just Before Dawn. So all right, I'm gonna go down the line a little bit more here. Let's see. I got a bunch of I'll do the Scream Factory releases. I'll kind of do them all together. I got Assault on Precinct 13, Night of the Comet, which both of those are collector's editions, so that means you get the slip with the new artwork and you get the original artwork on the inside, which is pretty cool. And I also picked up, just because I was very, very curious about this movie, and this is Scream as well, a movie called Eve of Destruction with Gregory Hines. This is from 1991. This is a great little movie. I had a lot of fun watching this movie. It's about this, this robot, this woman who's like this cyborg type thing that the government's making, and they're just out testing her one day, and she glitches, and she ends up out there just like messing with people, and and just she's all screwed up, and she's like doing things that she's not supposed to be doing. So, and then the whole idea is Gregory Hines works for like this elite government like agency, and he has to find her and like track her down, and it's a lot of fun, and there's some really silly shit in this movie. If you've never seen this movie before, it's kind of a campy, fun, just cool movie. And I don't know, there's just moments in this movie that are like some of the things that she goes through. Like she goes to a bar and picks up a guy, and there's the crazy scene where the guy tries to have sex with her, and she like freaks out on him and stuff. And I don't know, it's a lot of fun to watch, and the transfer is actually pretty decent. There's nothing particularly extra on here. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if the trailer's on here. It doesn't say it on the package, and I can't remember if it was actually on the disc. But yeah, definitely worth picking up this movie if you're curious about it and you like those kind of like late night HBO Cinemax movies from back in the day where they used to show these random friggin' movies that you never heard of before, but they usually ended up being kind of fun, kind of sci-fi thriller-esque. So it's worth it if you're into that kind of stuff. But I'm going to move ahead. I said, Assault on Precinct 13 and Night of the Comet. I'd never seen Night of the Comet, and I loved it. Night of the Comet is a great little movie. You've got these like 2 valley girls who end up being like the last girls alive after this comet causes like the apocalypse, so to speak. And it's kind of a comic vibe to it. Who is it? Catherine Mary Stewart from The Last Starfighter and Kelly Maroney from Chopping Mall. And there's also the guy that was in Eating Raoul, who plays like the last guy, supposedly the last guy that's alive, but he's not really the last guy alive. But to them, he is, because he's hanging out with them. There's this group of scientists with Mary Warnoff and Jeffrey Lewis, oddly enough, from the Clint Eastwood movies and Devil's Rejects and stuff like that. And basically, it's just about them trying to deal with the situation. And there are some zombies, like people turn into zombies because of the comet, and there's a whole bunch of weird crap going on. But this is a lot of fun. Yeah, Night of the Living Dead meets Valley Girl. That's a pretty good way to describe it. That's what it says on the back of the box here. But this is just a whole lot of fun, this movie. And I enjoyed watching it, and at times it takes itself seriously, and at times it's kind of campy and just fun, and like, it's got a very unique style, and I had never seen this movie before. It's got audio commentary and interviews with stars Kelly Maroney, Catherine Mary Stewart, Mary Warnoff, and makeup effects creator David B. Miller. Plus, there's also the guy who played in Eating Raoul, which I can't think of what his name is right now because they don't list his name on the box. But definitely worth it if you're a fan of Night of the Comet. It's a really good transfer, pretty filmic. Like it's on par with most of the MGM stuff that Scream Factory's been putting out. They all kind of have a similar look. But definitely a good high definition transfer. And if you're a fan of this movie, I would pick it up because it's a good release. But okay, so I'll move ahead to Assault on Precinct 13. Now, if you previously owned the last Blu-ray release of this that came out, it is the same transfer. According to what Scream Factory says, this is the same transfer. It looked to me like they might have toned the colors down a little bit, because there was a real heavy push to yellow on the previous transfer. Maybe that was just my previous set, and now that my set's calibrated better. But it's got new interviews with actress Nancy Loomis and art director Tommy Lee Wallace. Plus, it's got a commentary by John Carpenter and an interview with John Carpenter and Austin Stoker. That's it's cool because that's actually like a Q&A after like a screening, and that was on the previous edition as well. But that's like, I want to say that's like an hour long, or at least a half hour. But some really good stuff, and it's a good transfer of the movie. And I don't know, I like Assault on Precinct 13. Some people don't. It's not their favorite John Carpenter movie. Basically, this Austin Stoker plays this cop that gets sent on his first night to watch over a precinct that's being shut down. And it's in a bad area of town. And what ends up happening is this guy who gets attacked by these thugs, like this gang of people, ends up running into that police station for help. And there's a little more to that too, but I won't actually say what it is, so I don't spoil what happens to him, because it's actually one of the cooler scenes in the movie. But they end up at this police station, and generally speaking, the thugs come to the police station looking for him, and they don't want to give him up. So it's like a standoff type of thing. It's very much like a Western, actually. It's totally like John Carpenter wanted to make a Western, and this was his idea of like an urban Western. But I really like Assault on Precinct 13. And the new cover art is actually pretty cool, like the commissioned artwork. But it has the great original poster artwork. This is a white-hot night of hate on it. It's the gang that swore a blood oath to destroy Precinct 13 and every cop in it. It's just really classic exploitation artwork. So, I'm a fan of 70s movies anyway, and this falls right into that category. Good bonus features, great transfer. It's exactly the same as the previous transfer from what I can tell. So if you don't own this movie, this is the way to get it, because I don't think the image version is available anymore. It was out of print for a long time, so... All right, and I also got some Blue Underground releases. I got Maniac Cop 2 and Maniac Cop 3. And I had never seen Maniac Cop 2 or 3. I had Maniac Cop 1. I really enjoyed these two Maniac Cop movies. I gotta say, Maniac Cop 2 is batshit crazy. It is a cool action horror movie from the 80s. So that is well worth checking out. Maniac Cop 3 slows down a little bit, and oddly enough, it's directed by Alan Smithee, which anybody knows anything about film, movies that are directed by Alan Smithee usually mean that somebody had their name taken off. Sometimes it says written by Alan Smithee. This one is directed by Alan Smithee. That's a fake name that's used so that when there's problems on the film, then a director walks off the film and they have to have like 2 or 3 people finish it, it'll say like directed by Alan Smithy. And Maniac Cop 3 was directed by Alan Smithy. I think William Lustig like walked off the film like halfway through or something like that. But yeah, I liked Maniac Cop 3. It was entertaining. Maniac Cop 2 was great. These are really good releases too, and they're brand new 4K, which if you're familiar with like how last podcast I think I talked a little bit about the difference between telecine and having a scan. These are brand new scans. So these are like immaculate looking transfers. They look gorgeous. And for Maniac Cop, for Christ's sake, you know what I mean? So Maniac Cop 2 and 3 from Blue Underground, definitely worth the money. If you're a fan of these movies, and I think these movies are kind of fun because they're almost like, they're really weird. They're like cop movies, and they're sort of horror movies, and they're sort of cop movies, and I don't know. I got to take another drink. Mind me here. Hold on a second. I'm rambling. My throat's getting really dry. But, yeah, so Maniac Cop 2 and 3, definitely worth it. Pick them up if you're a fan of those movies. They're like 80s cop movies with a horror element. So if you like that kind of stuff, definitely get those. Now the last movie I'm going to talk about here is a really random movie, and I mean this, like I said, from time to time I'm going to talk about other genres other than horror, action, sci-fi, whatever. I just picked up this movie the other day because it was Black Friday, had all these sales, and literally I think I paid out of pocket like $3 for the movie on Blu-ray. It's a movie called Pain and Gain, directed by Michael Bay. Now, I know Michael Bay, and I can't stand Michael Bay for the most part. You know, some people like him. I'm not a fan, generally speaking, of Michael Bay. I'm not really into the Transformers movies and stuff like that. But this wasn't a typical action film by him. This is based on a true life crime case about these, it was called the Sun Gym Gang, about these guys who were they were bodybuilders, and they just decided that they wanted to, one of the guys decided that he wanted to get ahead, so they decided they're going to kidnap this guy who has money and basically take his house and his money and all that stuff. And as you can imagine, everything that can go wrong does go wrong, and it just gets crazier and crazier and more violent, and it's a pretty dark story. But Mark Wahlberg is great in this movie, and I'm a fan of Mark Wahlberg anyway. I think he's a decent actor, and he does a good job from time to time. Loved him in Ted, stuff. I've seen him. I mean, I go all the way back to Fear with Reese Witherspoon, because that movie was a lot of fun. But I think this movie is being mismarketed, because I think a lot of people are looking at this movie and Michael Bay and stuff like that, and it just looks like it's supposed to be like an action film or something like that. This is not an action film. This is a messed up true crime drama. This is in the same category as like Alpha Dog, if you've ever seen that movie. It's just a creepy, messed up, like true crime kind of weird movie, and I really enjoyed it. And actually I'm kind of ticked off because they released this standard version of the movie that has no bonus features at all, okay, on Blu-ray. And that's the version I got for really cheap. I got it for $7.99 at a Black Friday sale, and actually I had a $5 gift card, so like I said, it only cost me like $3 out of pocket. But then they actually, just recently I just read, it's coming out like next week, like December 3rd or something like that, which I'm recording this podcast on December 2nd, so if you don't hear this until later, you'll know why I'm talking about things that are having, that are coming out later or whatever. It just kind of screwed. The dates are a little weird, but this is the December podcast in general. They're releasing a special edition of the movie. I guess from what I can gather, it has a different cover and it has about an hour's worth of like documentary stuff on it. There's no extended cut of the movie or anything like that, so that's pretty cool. I think I can just live with the normal version of the movie since I literally just spent like $3 for it and got it, so whatever with that. But the movie is great. It's well worth the money, and I know if you're a little skeptical about Michael Bay in general, which I am, like, I enjoyed the movie. It was a good true crime movie, kind of amped up. It's almost like his really lavish, over the top style really fit the story for this movie, because you were dealing with these like bodybuilder guys and it takes place in Miami, and everything that they deal with is just kind of, they want to be rich, they want to be famous, they want to hang out with like hot chicks and all kinds of stuff like that. So that is typically what you get in a Michael Bay movie anyway, but you bring all that stuff and you put it together with a true crime story, and it actually works out to be a pretty cool, pretty creepy, kind of messed up true crime story. So I mean, that's worth it. So the movie's called Pain and Gain, and if you haven't checked it out, I definitely suggest checking that movie out if you're a fan of like true crime films in general. Movies like Boys Don't Cry and Alpha Dog and like those type of movies. It's definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of those kind of movies. Okay, so I'm going to move on now. Kind of finish with my review section here. I'm going to move forward to the main topic of this podcast this time. 70s horror movies, which is funny that I'm doing a 70s horror movies podcast on Christmas. Like I said, I'm not going to do the Christmas thing. I'm just going to do what I feel like doing. But I'm a huge fan of 70s cinema in general. 70s horror movies and 70s cinema. That'll be our general topic. It's going to be mainly horror movies, though. But over the past couple of nights, I've just felt like watching 70s horror films. I just felt like rewatching as many as I possibly could. And I've been just like having these like marathon runs of like watching 70s horror films. And I don't know, it's just there's something about these movies. What's hilarious is I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, I Spit in Your Grave. Mother's Day is 1980, but it's the tail end of the 70s. It was filmed in the 70s. And I also watched Don't Go in the House, which was 1980, but like I said, that was filmed in like 78 or 79 or something like that. So it's the tail end of 70s horror cinema. And aside from Don't Go in the House, all of these movies have been remade. Like all these movies that I grew up being a huge fan of have been remade in some ways inferior remakes. You know, there are good things about them. I didn't hate the Last House on the Left remake. I did when I first saw it. With the remakes, I'm not going to get too heavily into that subject matter, but I Spit in Your Grave, though. I did like the I Spit in Your Grave remake. It's brutal. It works. What's the other one? Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It took me a while to like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake because I was not a fan of the overly slick production and the pretty people, basically, in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. But I've grown to appreciate it for what it is because it's pretty over the top and pretty crazy and violent, which that's the funniest thing about the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that it's not really, it's intense, but it's not violent, say like gory. There's not really any blood in the movie. As a matter of fact, I don't think there is any on-screen blood in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre except for a few minor little things here and there. I'm trying to think of it now. You don't really see a lot. Most of it happens off screen, and it's like super duper intense. But back on the subject matter of these 70s movies, because I've been watching them, there's just a style and an intensity to 70s cinema. You know, people were coming off the Vietnam War, and a lot of filmmakers have said that during that time period there was a lot of really graphic imagery being shown on the news. So what they were doing was, for them, people were getting so desensitized to seeing all this violence on the news, filmmakers were making these ultra-violent kind of like realistic movies as their way of making a statement about, you know, I mean, yeah, they were just making this stuff to sell money, to sell movies to sell tickets, because a lot of them were drive-in movies. That exploitation was a big deal in the 70s, and, you know, every possible subject that you could imagine was exploited in a crass, crazy way. But that's for horror movies anyway. For the dramas from the 70s, and stuff like that, things were, you know, there were really good character stories in the 70s. Movies like Five Easy Pieces, or like, you know, the BBS stuff like Five Easy Pieces. Easy Rider was 69, but that was a great movie. It's a movie called The King of Marvin Gardens, which is an awesome movie with Jack Nicholson and Bruce Dern. But it was just a better time for filmmaking because there was a lot of experimentation going on, and there was a lot of personal movies getting made, a lot of like independent films. Like, you know, like say me, like Roadkill Entertainment, we make our own movies. Back in the 70s, I think we really would have had a chance to have our movies shown at like local drive-ins and stuff like that, because you could literally make a movie with no actors, nobody anybody had ever heard of, and go to your local drive-in, and if they had slots and they were interested, you could freaking sell it to a distributor back then and get this stuff out there. Like, people were doing this. They were going to producers and saying, hey, listen, you know, I got a camera, I got some buddies, we want to make a horror movie, and we need some place to show it. All right, well, I own a chain of drive-ins, and let's see, make something, let me see it, and if I like it, maybe we'll show it. And that's how a lot of these horror movies got made. They also made deals with shady people, like in the case of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where they made a deal with this company called Bryanston Films, which turned out to be all mafia and mobsters, and basically in the end, they got screwed out of their money. And I think Tobe Hooper said to this day he hasn't seen a penny for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Very little money. I don't know how much it would have been, but it was very, very barely any money. If he's seen anything. Maybe now he's made a few bucks off of reissues and stuff like that he's been involved in. More probably being paid for the interviews that he did on the reissues than anything else. But yeah, I mean, I watched, like, let's talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, okay? At first, I mean, when I saw this movie in high school, it blew my mind. It was one of these movies that, like, it was so intense that I had to show everybody I know and, like, make them sit through it so I could see how, once you got to the end of the movie, you know, and a spoiler alert here, because I'm going to be giving away some of these, there should be some spoilers with these movies, because, I mean, if you haven't seen them and you're a horror fan, shame on you, you should be watching them, but you know what I mean? But anyway, yeah, just craziness. Like, the movie gets so freaking intense once you get towards the end of the movie that I just loved it growing up, and it was just it was a totally different style of thing for me to see something, people screaming and freaking out, and you know, the whole end of the movie where they've got Marilyn. I was going to say Marilyn Chambers. Marilyn Burns' character, Marilyn Chambers was like 70s porn. Marilyn Burns' character tied to the freaking chair in the house with the family, and they've got Grandpa with the freaking sledgehammer trying to beat her head in with the sledgehammer over a freaking old metal bucket. She finally breaks herself free, jumps through the window. I mean, it is total chaos. And there's like an amazing chase scene. Like, I'm a huge fan of 70s cinema, and I think it shows in the work that I do, because I'm more into that type of filmmaking than anything else. But I don't know. There's a great their chase scene with Marilyn Burns and her brother Franklin, the guy who I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but that played the brother Franklin, in the wheelchair, and she's pushing him through the woods trying to find her friends because her friends are gone. And out of nowhere, Leatherface comes out of the woods with this chainsaw and just like attacks the brother Franklin in the wheelchair. Sally Hardesty was the name of Sally was the character name that Marilyn Burns was playing. And he just like rips into Franklin with the chainsaw. You don't see the blood or anything. You just hear the screaming and the craziness, and you see it because it's really dark and they're walking around with a flashlight. And from that point on, basically she runs off, and Leatherface chases her through the woods and around a few of these like little, it's basically it's like their house, and like I think it's the gas station that they had. I can't remember if it was actually, yeah, 'cause she ends up at the gas station. But he just chases her for like 15 minutes or so of the movie, and it's a very, very intense scene, and it's lowly lit, and it's dark, and it's creepy, and all you're hearing is the sound of that chainsaw and her screaming, and it's non-stop. She screams so much in that movie, but the intensity is so amazing. It really, really, really like freaked me out, and when I was younger, and even to just the other night when I was watching it again, I was like, wow, that's amazing. But I mean, the 70s is my favorite time of filmmaking. I mean, even movies like more mainstream stuff like Carrie, which is one of my favorite movies, Brian De Palma's Carrie. Such a great style to that movie. I haven't seen the remake yet. I'm a little bit skeptical on whether I'm going to like the remake or not, because Sissy Spacek is such a great actress that, to me, Carrie White will always be Sissy Spacek, and, you know, Piper Laurie will always be, you know, her mom. What's the mother's name? I don't know. Margaret White. But yeah, I mean, I love that movie. The style, the look, the tone. I mean, the whole movie, most of my old horror stuff that I was like trying to write when I was younger was so based on the style of Carrie, where it was like, you know, the first 75% of the movie is like a character drama with like a high school drama, and then it turns crazy at the end, and you know, all based on, you know, Stephen King's novel and whatnot. And I guess from what I've heard, because I've never read the book, it's an accurate portrayal of the novel. I'm not really sure, but more water, sorry. But yeah, I mean, I love Carrie. Carrie's one of my favorite films. Most of my favorite films from the 70s. I was a big fan of a movie called Harold and Maude with Ruth Gordon and Bud Cort. I love Harold and Maude. That is such a great movie. And it's kind of a weird love story, but 70s style, you know what I mean? And I don't mean 70s style as in porno, I mean 70s style as in just the style of the movie. You know, it's very down to earth. And it's kind of down because the character Bud Cort plays Harold is obsessed with death, and he just wants to die throughout the whole movie. And he ends up befriending this woman who basically has decided that she's going to kill herself. And, you know, because she's like 80 years old or something like that. I can't remember her exact age, but that her life is over. She's done with it. She's going to poison herself. But they kind of fall in love with each other. She's this quirky weird old lady who goes around stealing things and doing weird shit. And they fall in love with each other. But it's not a typical like romance movie. It's all the things that happen to both characters throughout the course of this movie, and then they build to like a cool conclusion. Basically, Harold kind of appreciating life, being that he was so obsessed with death. He would stage these elaborate deaths for his mother all the time, like these stage deaths where he would like hang himself in the house or like shoot himself with a prop gun or something like that. It's funny. I mean, it sounds weird when you hear somebody else just talking. It's one of those movies you just got to see it, and if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. A lot of 70s movies are like that. But I mean, back to the 70s horror stuff that I've been watching, like I said, a lot of lately. I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Actually, it was 1980 for this one, but I watched a movie last night that I think needs to be appreciated more than it actually is. It's a movie called Don't Go in the House. This movie is awesome. It stars this guy named Dan Grimaldi, who's actually like a reoccurring character on The Sopranos. But this is a crazy freaking movie. Like the main character of this movie is this guy who was basically kind of tortured by his mother when he was young. She used to burn his arms on the stove and stuff like that. And when he gets older, she dies. And when she passes away, he starts hearing these voices in his head. And the voices are basically telling him, like, you can do whatever you want now. You're stuck in this house. You know, you don't have to do what your mother tells you anymore. So he decides that he's just going to do whatever the hell he feels like doing. So he starts just doing crazy shit, playing his music a lot. It's very kind of childish in that way. But the movie's not childish in any means. It's a complete exploitation film. And so he starts picking up these girls. He builds this, I guess it's a spoiler alert, he builds this this metal room in his house. He starts bringing women home, like kidnapping women and chaining them up in this metal room, and setting them on fire, like full out setting them on fire. He has this like fire suit he wears, and he brings them in there, and it is a terrifying movie in that way. Like, it's very intense and very, like, that's the thing with a lot of these 70s movies is nowadays people watch them and they laugh because of the kitsch factor of the 70s clothing or the music or whatnot. But the stories were intense and dark. And I mean, like I said, this is 1980, but it was probably filmed in like 78, 79. But he just like sets these women on fire. And I don't know, it's a crazy little movie. And he talks to them, and he keeps these women like they're just all burnt and stuff like that. He dresses them in his mother's clothes, and he keeps them in his house, and it's got a nice creepy vibe over the whole movie. And I really got sucked into the movie watching it again last night. I think it's called Don't Go in the House, and it's a little hard to find, but Media Blasters put out a version of it on DVD. That's the only version that I have. And I think that's the best version that came out of it. It still hasn't been released on Blu-ray or anything like that. It'd be nice if it did come out. I think Scorpion might have it, but I'm not sure. But anyway, So yeah, check out Don't Go in the House, because Don't Go in the House is such an awesome, like, late 70s, early 80s trash film. Grindhouse movie, I guess is what they would call them. A drive-in movie. But, so yeah, I watched that movie. That movie needs to be appreciated more. But I also watched, and I love Mother's Day, Charles Kaufman's Mother's Day. It's not a Trauma film. It's distributed by Trauma. It was made kind of pre-Trauma. But Charles Kaufman is Lloyd Kaufman's brother, so I think Lloyd Kaufman had some involvement in the making of it with him as well. So Trauma has picked it up, and Trauma distributes it now. But the Blu-ray that came out from Anchor Bay not that long ago, because Darren Lynn Bousman's remake, which is actually pretty good, it's not really a remake. It's a remake in name and general characters. The story has kind of changed. And I liked it. I actually really liked Darren Lynn Bousman's remake of Mother's Day. I think it's a pretty... It has that hard-edged 70s vibe like a lot of these movies had. The funny thing about Mother's Day is more comedic. Because Mother's Day is about a bunch of these three girls that are old college buddies who decide that every year one of them picks a place to go. And the other two don't know, and they go on this vacation. And so this year, the one that's taking them on the vacation decides to take them camping in the middle of the woods, out in the middle of nowhere. And of course, she takes them camping in the middle of the woods, and you've got these two crazy brothers, Ike and Adley, living with their mother in this old house out in the middle of nowhere, and they basically just kidnap and kill people. That's pretty much what it is. But it's got a cool campy style and like a weird humor to it, and there's quite a few jokes in the movie, like disco versus punk. It's I don't know, it's a great fun movie. I've watched it so many times since I got the Blu-ray. I literally have watched the Blu-ray like 3 or 4 times, and it just came out like last year. For some reason, it's a really good transfer, and I just keep watching the movie over and over again. It's just one of those movies that I love. And so that's an awesome movie, Mother's Day. I watched Mother's Day. I also watched, of course, 2 very classic 70s like drive-in exploitation films, Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave. Last House on the Left is an interesting story. I'll talk about that a little bit, because I'm a huge fan of Last House on the Left. I don't know if you've never seen the movie Last House on the Left. It's basically about it's from 1972. It's basically about a group of criminals that escape from a local institution or asylum or something like that. I don't know if they said it was an asylum or it was just a prison escape or something. I can't remember, actually. No, I've seen the movie a million times too. They escaped. They're escaped criminals. And these 2 girls, Mary and Phyllis, are going to a concert in the city for a band called Bloodlust. And they end up going to score drugs off of this guy who's standing outside. Now... who was just standing out in the streets of New York City, and he ends up bringing them up to this apartment where they're kidnapped by Krug, Sadie, Weasel, and Junior, the criminals. And those, basically what they do is they take them out into the woods to have their way with them and have fun with them, and they somehow end up across the street from the girl Mary, the main character Mary, her house, her parents' house. They're in the woods across the street from her parents' house. And, you know, there's some pretty nasty stuff that happens in the woods, and they get killed, and then they end up then they end up, because their car broke down, right across the street from the parents' house. It's actually a remake of an Ingmar Bergman film called The Virgin Spring. That's Wes Craven just kind of reworked the idea, and they end up at the parents' house, and the parents eventually figure out that they're the ones that, because their daughter hasn't come home, they realize their daughter's dead, and that these are the guys that killed their daughter, and revenge ensues. That's Last House on the Left in a nutshell. Should have said spoiler alert on that one, but if you've never seen Last House on the Left, I don't care. So, I spoiled the movie, but watch it. It's a cool friggin' movie. It's got some good twists in it. But the interesting thing about Last House on the Left is there's a guy in the movie called the main character Krug, played by a guy named David Alexander Hess. And in high school, me and my buddy Pete were obsessed with Last House on the Left. I started the whole ball rolling with Last House on the Left because my dad had been watching it, and I thought it was this crazy 70s movie, and we rented it. And there was always kind of a mystique to the movie because the version of the film that was released there was an R-rated cut, and there was a lot of stuff cut out of the movie. So it was one of these movies where we had to hunt down the unrated version, the uncut version. Because back in the day, it was much harder to find uncut versions of movies than it is now. Everything comes out unrated and uncut now. We had to hunt down this movie. And man, it was a great film. And I liked it. I think Peter fell asleep the first time we watched it. But then we hunted down the uncut version. When we finally saw all the gore, like the violence that had been cut out of the movie, it was much more powerful. Most of the torturing sequences in the woods with the girls are cut down to like nothing in the shorter cut of the movie. And this was basically because when the movie came out originally in the 70s, it shocked a lot of people because it was pretty intense. It's campy, but then it gets very intense in like in the woods sequences where the girls are getting tortured and raped and whatnot. So, theater owners would get complaints from their patrons, and the projectionists would take it upon themselves to cut things out of the print of the movie so that they could show it and still make the money, but they would cut stuff out that customers didn't like. Now, it's amazing that they could do this stuff back then, but they did back in the drive-in days. And because of that, it was very, very hard to find a complete print of Last House on the Left. For years, it was very hard to find a completely uncut version of that movie. Basically, the version that exists now on Blu-ray is, from what anybody can tell, it's, according to the filmmakers and whatnot, this is the complete uncut version of the movie. There's a lot of outtakes on there to almost kind of prove it, because they show you everything that was shot for almost everything that was shot for the movie, because there's so much history behind this film. But I'm a big fan of Last House on the Left, always was. In high school, my buddy Pete and I and a friend Liza and a friend Gretchen, we took a trip up to Connecticut. We drove all the way up to Connecticut to the locations where they shot Last House on the Left, Westport, Connecticut. And we just went around trying to find places where they shot the movie and had a blast. And we filmed this little short like video about it and stuff like that. But we were obsessed with this movie also because we were musicians, and the music in the movie was great. It was recorded by a guy named David Hess. And he also played the main baddie of the bad guys, Krug. And he went on to do a bunch of movies in the 70s. A movie House on the Edge of the Park. He made a movie called Hitchhike. He ended up playing the same character kind of over and over again. But he was also a really good musician as well. And the soundtrack to The Last House on the Left was great. It's all this like folky kind of like Graham Nashy kind of folk music that kind of like Terry Reid kind of like folk music that adds a distinct tone to the movie. It really gives the movie its own feeling and style and vibe. It's very different than a lot of the stuff that was going on. And a lot of movies started to copy it after Last House. Last House was like the first movie to do a lot of the stuff that it did. And all these other movies came out and basically ripped off Last House. They ripped off the ad campaign. It's only a movie. It's only a movie, over and over again. But so jump forward years later, which is a really random story. Throughout, now I wish she was here to tell the story because she would have a better take on it as well. And maybe I'll bring this up with my buddy Pete because he'll be here, you know, for the next podcast that I record. And I'll have him talk about it a little bit. Basically, my buddy Liza wrote to David Hess, and she ended up just writing back and forth to him, and they ended up kind of becoming like pen pals in a sense and friends. And he invited her, I think initially invited her because she was a good-looking girl, and he thought he could get something out of her. Invited her back to stay at his house. And Liza, being the crazy person that she is, she's kind of nuts and over the top. She's in my movie Hometown. She said, okay, cool. And she went out to California. She stayed at his house. And so she became friends with him. Then my buddy Pete got to meet him, and I got to talk to him a bunch of times on the phone. I met him in person once at a Rock and Shock Film Festival. And, you know, we talked personally and stuff. It was really funny because I was in line with other people, and then I introduced myself, and David Hess gets up and walks around the table and gives me a big hug, telling me that he's sorry he missed my wedding and all that stuff. And like everyone else behind me is like, people, the guy that's standing behind me, which is a whole other story, but the guy standing behind me was like, kind of like, what the hell's going on? Like, this is like a personal reunion here. And he just wanted to get his shit signed, you know? So I finally get to meet David Hess. I get to talk to him on the phone. I talked to him about a lot of his movies. We talked about just life in general. He was a really great guy, and he passed away a couple of years ago, and it was a big loss for my friends because they had become really close friends with him, and he would write back and forth to him all the time. But it's this really weird connection because we were obsessed with the movie in high school, and then years later, we actually ended up kind of befriending. I mean, I did to a certain degree. My friend Peter and my friend Liza became much better friends with him. They actually stayed at his house and knew his family. They got to know him quite well. I actually dedicated my movie Hometown to him. It starts off with the last house on the left, like the events you're about to see are real thing, and it says for David. I dedicated it to him because he was such a big inspiration for us growing up. I mean, I know a lot of people, they have bigger inspirations. I mean, I was a big Spielberg fan. I love Spielberg movies, but I mean, this is my horror. This is the horror element. This is what I was fans of in the horror community, so to speak. So we basically, you know, it's just really weird that years later, I actually got to know the man on a personal level, and I got to talk to him, and friends of mine became really good friends with him. And all this stemmed from our love of the movie in high school. Really weird, like full circle type of thing that happened with Last House on the Left. And Last House on the Left holds like kind of a, I don't know, it holds a really strong place in my memory and in my, you know, and the whole nostalgia factor of looking back for me. Last House on the Left is that movie that I watched in high school a bunch of times, that we hunted down, that we drove to where they filmed the movie. You know, I ended up meeting the guy and sort of becoming friends with him, and knowing my friends becoming friends with him later in life. And it's such a weird little story, and you know, maybe I'll bring it up around Pete when I have him here, and he can kind of tell his side of the story, because, you know, it's very interesting how it all just became that, you know. But I don't know, Last House on the Left is a cool movie. It's a very influential 70s movie. If you're fans of these type of movies, it's definitely something to check out. So the last one I'm gonna bring up here, I think, because I talked about all of them so far, the last one that I really watched was I Spit on Your Grave. And this movie gets a lot of flack because, I mean, the movie has a 25-minute rape sequence in it, and you know, it's really hard to defend the movie. I actually met Camille Keaton at a convention, and I got to talk to her, and she's an awesome person. She's beautiful. She's a great woman, and she's really friendly, and she's really open about this movie. Like, she did this movie, and she was an actor. She had done, for the American audience, wasn't really familiar with the fact that she had done Italian films. So yeah, you might hear a little bit of noise in the background. That's my wife also works from home, and she's doing something. So, but I don't think that's going to pick up too well. But if it does, that's the weirdness that you're hearing in the background. But regardless of that, I met Camille Keaton, and she was really awesome. And I told her about the first time I saw Spit in Your Grave, and I brought it home, and I just happened to rent the movie, and the box art, the cover with the woman standing there, you know, with the knife and everything that, and it says, you know, this woman has just brutally killed, you know, actually said 5 men on the original poster, but there's only 4 men in the movie. That was a classic misprint. But I brought the movie home, started watching it. My uncle, at the time, Uncle Russell, was just stopping by to visit my mom, her brother, and he saw what I was watching, and he was, you know, grew up in the 70s, and he was aware of it. And I remember him telling my mother to tell me to shut the movie off because he was offended by that movie, and he didn't want it playing while he was there. So, I mean, of course, I had never watched the movie, and I didn't know what was going on or what was even going to happen. And he says this, and of course I'm like, shit, now I really got to see this movie. What the hell's going on in this movie? So I had to kind of be careful when he was there. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it's a rough movie to get through. She gets raped by these guys for like 25 minutes, and then they leave her for dead. And then she comes back and gets revenge on all the guys. Some of the greatest revenge, specifically one sequence, is one of the greatest revenge sequences in a horror movie. Like, for those type of movies, those rape revenge movies, which there was a kind of a whole genre of them. Miss 45 was a rape revenge. That was in the 80s. There's a movie Irreversible now, which is pretty disturbing, but that's a more modern version of what that is. But man, what a movie. What an intense movie. If you have the stomach for it and you can handle it. And like I said, it's a hard movie to defend because of the rape sequence. It's not titillating in any way, shape, or form, the 25-minute rape sequence. I was telling my wife that because I was watching it last night. I said, this movie is sex as violence throughout that whole rape sequence. And it's done that way. I mean, it's really intensely paced throughout that. It just, like, her ordeal gets worse and worse and worse. And by the end, I mean, I have never been like titillated or anything by the footage of the rape sequence in the movie. Maybe there are people out there that are, because there are fetishes for everything, but I've never found it to be erotic in any shape. But it's interesting because towards the end of the movie, when she gets revenge, she does herself up and she lures the men back in, and then she is kind of sexy, and they go with the sex angle on the movie. And I think that's what threw people off, is that she lured the men back in a sexy way. I mean, the actress Camille Keaton spends like 65, at least between 60 and 70% of the movie butt naked throughout the whole film. Like, that's, and it's not porno, the movie. So that is a really interesting, like, I've just been tricky for her. I mean, she's walking through these crappy woods and trees and branches and all this stuff, just completely naked. And yeah, I don't know. It's a crazy, crazy movie. It's intense. It's strong. But I mean, that's what 70s cinema was all about. It was intense and strong. And I mean, if you can stomach this stuff, check it out. It's well worth seeing if you can stomach it. A lot of people can't make it through it more than once. I've seen the movie multiple times, so the shock factor is kind of like diminished over the years, but it's still a strong movie. And I mean, the Blu-ray that came out by Anchor Bay looks great. It's for that movie, man. It's like, wow. And Last House on the Left came out on Blu-ray as well, and that looks pretty decent, but that was shot on Super 16mm film, and it's kind of a rough-looking film anyway, but it's a pretty good, film transfer. I also watched The Hills Have Eyes, which I love, which is another Wes Craven movie. The original Hills Have Eyes. There's a really creepy vibe to The Hills Have Eyes, just like most of the movie's in the dark, and it takes place at night, and the remake did a good job of it. It's pretty much a play-by-play remake of the original movie, if you've seen the Alejandro Aja version of it. But I recommend going back to the 70s versions. Watch these 70s horror movies. Dig yourself into 70s film culture, because it was the start of a new time for cinema. I miss it. Like, I mean, I was born in 75, but like, I miss that cinematic era where everything was new and people were trying new ideas and stuff. And now everything's been so played out that there's not a lot of new ideas left in cinema now. But, I guess that's the way everything goes. But every now and then there's some independent stuff that comes up. And now, like I've said, with the HD cameras, it's really easy for people to get HD cameras and stuff like that now. So there's a lot of low budget stuff. You gotta hunt it out, because some of the stuff's not getting distributed. And like our movie, we're trying to get it distributed. It's very hard to get movies distributed now because there's so much stuff out there. But you can self-distribute it. You can put it online. You can sell it yourself. You can do all those kinds of stuff. Put it on freaking YouTube and just let people watch it. I mean, you made a movie. Get it out there. Let people watch it. Sell copies of your own movie off your website. Who cares? Big deal. A lot of independent filmmakers want to wait for that distribution. And that frustrates me sometimes, because I'm a collector and I like to collect movies and I like to rewatch movies. And it's like, there are movies that you can't own because they don't have distribution yet. But I want to own the movie. Like, I'm a fan. I want to watch your movie over again, but I can't buy it. So I said, when I started making these movies, that I'm going to be selling them off my website until somebody takes them from me and does something with them, and then they'll be available through that company. But I'm putting my own movies out there so people can watch them. I got off a little tangent there on my own stuff, but I mean, 70s cinema is just, it's so raw and so rough and so like, I don't know. I'm a huge fan of 70s horror movies and 70s cinema in general. And I mean, search this stuff out. I mean, a lot of people are seeing like the remakes of movies nowadays, You see, if you've seen the remake of Mother's Day, go find the original Mother's Day. Like, it's a fun movie. Yeah, maybe it's dated, maybe it's silly, but it's a lot of fun to watch. I highly recommend watching the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre over the remake. And I think the problem is people who see the remake first are going to have issues with the original. They're going to say, well, nothing happens in it. You know what I mean? But the intensity, I say watch the originals first before you watch the remakes. So this way you can at least appreciate where the remakes are coming from. Because you watch the remakes first, some modern cinema goers are going to like the remakes better because they're flashier. And people like flashier stuff nowadays. But I don't know, I Spit in Your Grave is a tough one to get through, but if you have the stomach for it and you can handle movies like that, it's a very well-made movie. The filmmaker who made the movie said that the movie was inspired by, he saw a woman walking out of the park in like New York or something like that, and she, I guess, had been attacked and raped, and she walked out of the park like butt naked, just walking through the streets, like totally destroyed. And I guess him and his family helped her out and brought her somewhere, and it just made him think, what happened to this woman? What was her story? And that's what prompted him to come up with the idea for I Spit in Your Grave, and that was the story, because he wanted to kind of tell that story, and he wanted to convey the intensity of the moment and the way it was that he saw it, how he saw it. That's a little history on I Spit in Your Grave, but Last House on the Left is a fun movie. It's campy, but it has its darker moments. The remake does a good job of recreating the same events, but like I've said, in all cases, I always say go back to the original, because, I mean, that's the original idea. That's the movie. That's the way it was. These remakes now, they've remade literally everything that I've ever loved horror movie-wise. And some of them are good, and some of them are whatever, and just kind of blah. But anyway, I think I'm going to kind of just conclude my 70s horror, things. I've been rambling here for a while now. We're over an hour. So this episode's a little longer than the last. But I hope you enjoyed listening to Roadkill Entertainment's podcast, episode 2 of the Video Village podcast. If you're interested in Roadkill Entertainment, you can go to our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/roadkillentertainment, or you can go to our website, which is Jaybyrne75, JaybyRne 75.wix.com/roadkillentertainment, one word. So yeah, so you can either check us out on our website or check us out on Facebook. Check out our movies. We definitely want you to do that. So I hope you enjoyed it, and next one will hopefully be my buddy Pete here with me, and we'll be talking about Diamond Camp Films and growing up with horror movies and whatever else, some of our music and stuff like that, whatever we feel like talking about at the time. But I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and see you next time.